a blockbuster trade happened. Colorado traded Mikko Rantanen in a 3-team deal to the Carolina Hurricanes, acquiring forwards Martin Necas and Jack Drury, as well as second-round picks in this year's draft and a 4th-rounder in 2026. Carolina also, they did it all, guys. They got forward Taylor Hall from Chicago in the trade. Needless to say, it was a shocking trade, and it was even so for those that were involved in it.
Look, these are tough decisions. There's nothing done in a vacuum. You know, Mikko earned the right to be an unrestricted free agent, and he's 5 months away from that. So you got to make these hard decisions. The player has to make them, and the club has to make them, and that's what we did. And you know, getting 2 cost-controlled assets was important. You know, that we felt we got the top 6 guy and a good bottom 6 guy, and away we go.
Really tough day. Like, you lose a good friend, good teammate, great player. It's hard to see. It's hard, you know. But I understand the business side of things, and teams are calling, and you got to get what you can. And I think we got some good players that can come in and help us, but it doesn't make it any easier. You know, it's tough to see Mikko go for sure.
You know, I think a lot of the guys are just shocked. I mean, it's pretty crazy, someone like that getting traded right now, even big part of our team, our culture. I mean, he's been here from the dog days, has helped grow this organization into a Stanley Cup winner, and obviously being a contender every season is a big reason why. It's because of him. You know, that's just one part of it. Mostly it's, you know, we spend time together off the ice, so that's probably the part we'll miss most. He's goofy, just a great teammate, great person.
So shock, a common word that we were hearing. Meanwhile, Mikko Rantanen spoke today to the media and had this to say to the Athletic's Peter Baugh. I didn't know we were in a rush. That's what I felt. That's my honest opinion. It's business, and I understand they're trying to think what's best for the team. I was ready to take a significant discount from my market value. We had some chats a couple days before, and then they traded me. That's what happened. That's why I didn't expect it. So there's a lot of levels of shock here. It's shocking that he got moved the way he did in January. It's shocking to his teammates. Jared Bednar obviously had little information that this was happening. And then to hear from the player himself, he's ready to take a pay cut, and then boom, you're out the door. What do you make of all this, JD and Bill? I'm curious to get you guys to unpack this.
I'm trying not to say it smells fishy. It's just there's so much surprise there. We were talking before on the production meeting. It's just everybody seems surprised, and no one expected it, and everybody seems like they were negotiating in good faith, and then boom, just out of nowhere, this happens. So you heard it from Rantanen there, and obviously just listening to Nathan MacKinnon, who obviously wasn't consulted during this process, which I think he should be. No, and the coach as well, Jared Bednar. Everybody's kind of like, well, yeah, this happened, but you know, it is the business. I feel like they couldn't see a light at the end of the tunnel. GM McFarland decides to pull the trigger and make this huge blockbuster monumental trade. But I'm just a little baffled because I feel like there's so many blind spots here that weren't addressed at all.
And a player of his value, not to have that addressed, you would think at some point you'd go to Mikko Rantanen and say, okay, what's the process? What's the number value with your agent? What are we thinking of? And that he said he was willing to take a significant discount. And that was only a couple of days before. How does that turn into a trade immediately? Usually you run it through the player and you'd go to the agent and the player and say, okay, we're not on terms. We're going to begin shopping Mikko Rantanen. Unless you want to keep everything in the dark and just go forward in it, knowing you can't afford to keep Rantanen, Makar onto an extension. It's just going to be too much money. That is your thinking. But to blindside the whole team and a player of Rantanen's caliber just seems just rare and odd. I can't recall the last time that we've seen something like this. You do usually consult with a player of MacKinnon, Rantanen, how we go forward. Chris McFarland said, okay, we're not having the decision. We're going to move on from Rantanen and bring Necas in. And it just happened in a blink of an eye for everyone. Third, fourth liner, we get called in the office. That's fine. But he walked in. He got called into the GM's hotel room, 10, 15 minutes for 10 years of service. Thanks for coming. Talked to Jared Bednar and said, we got 10 or 15 minutes. You got a flight out to Carolina. Thank you for everything. Thanks for the Stanley Cup championship and going through the dog days for us. Time to go.
I was just saying, I've listened when Jack Drury played the first game. Obviously, he's not at the same stature. Hopefully, he gets there. But he was saying, too, people were texting me, like, I think you're traded, bro.
Yeah.
And he's like, what? No, I'm not. And then he's like, oh, my God, I am traded.
Well, and what's fascinating is we just had that graphic up about the points in the league and the this is a superstar in the National Hockey League. This is not, to your point, Bill, this is not a fourth-line guy. This is a guy that if he's willing to take less on your roster, perhaps you try and find a way. You've got 5 months. You heard McFarland talk, well, it's 5 months away from free agency. Yeah, that's still 5 months. You have a lot of time to figure out what that number is. Can you make it work? Maybe they claim they tried and they just were at an impasse, but, you know, to jump ship so quickly, it just seemed like this was Carolina wanted him. They had a deal in place. Very hard to get a deal for a player like Rantanen's status, and maybe it did happen that quickly, but you just find it so hard to believe that it seemed like Rantanen was willing to work within the numbers and to stay in Colorado.
Yeah. Well, it's like, who's lying right now? It's because it seems like a little bit like nobody, nobody knows. You know, obviously his longtime his agent, who has a lot of people, Draisaitl, has a lot of big names in the NHL. I don't know, because I don't know if Rantanen was probably not involved in a lot of the calls, and maybe he was getting, you know, broken telephone information, and maybe the agent said this is the number.
Broke down somewhere,
because you just can't, like, he's a top 10 player in the NHL. Like, I just think so. I think he's that good, that dominant. You can't find many guys that big of a body that can move like that. They can score in tight, defend, play hard, and he drives lines. Even though, listen, he played with Nathan MacKinnon, one of the best players in the NHL, but MacKinnon benefited from playing with him just as much as the Rantanen benefited there. So obviously Carolina, if you listen, take him all day,
every day,
find a way to sign him. Now he's got the familiarity with Aho, and
he comes in quicker.
Exactly. So I just think it's
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
so let's talk about the addition now, because you've got Rantanen, and you also added Taylor Hall, by the way. Oh, by the way, he was in this trade as well, kind of lost in the shuffle of the Rantanen drama. But now, what do you make of this Carolina team, guys? Was this the missing piece? Is this what's going to take them? You know, they make the playoffs 8 straight seasons in a row. There's no question they're a playoff and a Stanley Cup contender, but they haven't quite gotten to the Stanley Cup where we all expect them to be. But what do you make of this Carolina team now that they've added these 2 players?
A big reason they haven't gotten over the hump is because they haven't had a breakthrough player in the playoffs. Over 100 points in 80 games for Rantanen in the playoffs. Try and get that kind of production. It's so hard and rare to find. And if you get that kind of deal and you can pull a trigger on it, Tulsky, the GM in Carolina, just had to be saying, okay, Rantanen's going to fall into our laps. Doesn't matter how it goes. I just remember even with Bill Zito, with Jonathan Huberdeau, it's not the same to this extent, but Matthew Tkachuk coming and saying, this is a player that Matthew Tkachuk, we just can't find out there. There aren't a lot like him. He's kind of a unicorn. Rantanen, that same type of bill. He's a unicorn, and when you get him on your team, it's a luxury to have. Still some concern, maybe you address down the middle, but the way they play the details under Brind'Amour, so much structure, and Rantanen can play that kind of hockey, that in your face, and still be successful. And he's got a friend there.
Yeah,
Sebastian Aho riding shotgun. I know he loved Nathan MacKinnon, but he's got a fellow Finn that he can go with.
Well, even Halsey, and you know, credit to Tulsky for making these trades. He got Gensel last year and Rantanen this year. Obviously, they didn't re-sign Gensel, so I'm sure it's a priority to sign him, Rantanen, this year and get this done to not lose another one. But they didn't really give up any core guys, any huge assets. They were able to get these guys in trade without mortgaging a future. So now I think he's really got to sign Rantanen, and obviously you get Taylor Hall, who, if he can capture some magic and when he was in Boston and being a good secondary scorer, I think this is only benefits the Carolina Hurricanes. So, yeah, you take this all day if you're a GM, twice on Sunday, and you try to sign Rantanen. That's the biggest key.
And they do have the room to sign him, by the way. A lot more flexibility than Colorado had to try and get him under that cap space.
They do. The beauty of all this is Chicago in the mix. They eat half of Rantanen's salary and get a third-round pick out of the whole deal.
How the hell does?
So okay, we'll take on $4.5 or $4.9 million, and we'll take a third-round pick. Why not? You think Chicago would get a little bit more out of this deal moving forward, but it makes a lot of sense for the Carolina Hurricanes, Rod Brind'Amour, and it's wide open in the East. You look at the Metro and all the teams. There is no one you can pinpoint and say there's a clear-cut favorite, but the Hurricanes made a step forward.